Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Thucydides Peloponnesian War. Um, we kind of had yesterday's session was kind of weird because those two videos were on the same day, which I don't usually like to do. But because it was such a short one, I decided to put it with the tree year 9 together. Now we turn to year 10 of the war, starting. We're doing the summer of year 10. And we're now in the fifth book of the Thucydides. So let's start. Again, we're using the landmark Thucydides again, Crawley translation, the Google Books version for the rest of this. We start the fifth book, chapter 1. The next summer, the truce for the year ended after lasting until the Perithian Games. During the armistice, the Athenians expelled the legions from Delos, concluding they had been polluted by some old offense at the time of their consecration, and that this had been an omission from the previous purification of the island, which I have related had been doing accomplished by the removal of the old graves of the dead. The Delians had Antharithemians in Asia given them by Parmenesians and settled there when they left Delos. Chapter 2. Meanwhile, Cleon prevailed on the Athenians to let him set sail at the expiration of the armistice for the cities of the Thracian district with 1,200 hoplites and 300 horse from Athens, a larger force of allies, and 30 ships. First touching at the still besieged Sicyon and taking some hoplites from the army there, he sailed into the Clopha harbor, the territories of Theon, which was not far from the city. Thence, from, from thence, having learned to the deserters that Brasius was not in Teron, but that its garrison was not strong enough to give him battle, he advanced his army against the city, sending 10 ships to sail around into the harbor. He came to the first fortification recently built in front of the city by Brasidas in order to take in the suburb, to which he had pulled down a part of the original war and made it in one city. Paridus, the Spartan commander, which such garrison there was in place, hurried to the point to repel the Athenian assault, but finding himself hard pressed and seeing the ships that had been sent around sailing into the harbor, Perlidius began to be afraid that they might get up the city before the defenders were there, and their fortifications being also carried. He might be taken prisoner, so abandoned the outward fortification and ran to the city. But the Athenians from the ship had already taken Toron, and their land forces followed at the heel, burst in with him with a rush over the part of the old walls that had been pulled down, killing some of the Peloponnesians, Taurasians in a melee, and taking prisoners of the rest. The Palladians and their commanders amongst them. Barad, I keep on saying his name, Brasidas, meanwhile, had advanced to leave Turin and had only 4 miles more to go when he heard of its fall on the road and turned back again. Cleon and the Athenians set up 2 trophies, one by the harbor and the other by the fortification, and making slaves of the wives and the children of the Tyrannies, and set the men with the Peloponnesians and the Cladicians that were there to number 700 to Athens, from which, however, all came home afterwards. From which, however, they all came home afterwards. The Peloponnesians on the conditions of conclusion of peace, and the rest by being exchanged for other prisoners with the Orlythians. About the same time, Pantocraeum, a fortress on the Athenian border, was taken by treachery by the Boeotians. Meanwhile, Cleon, having placed a garrison at Teron, weighed anchor and sailed around Athos on the way to Amphipolis. About the same time, Phrelix, son of Aristastinos, no, Aristrasus, sent sail with two colleagues as ambassadors from Athens to Italy and Sicily. The Leontides, upon the departure of the Athenians from Sicily, made the peace agreement, had enrolled many new citizens, and the people planned to redistribute the land, but those in power, aware of their intentions, called in the Syracusans to expel the people. These last were scattered in various directions, but the upper classes came to an agreement with the Syracusans, abandoned the waylaid their city, and went to live at Syracuse, where they were made citizens. Afterwards, some were dissatisfied in leaving Syracuse, preoccupied Procus, a quarter of the city of Leonti and the Brache, and a fortified place in the Leontine country. And being there joined by most of the exiled people carried on war with carried on war with the fortifications. The Athenians, hearing this, sent Phrelax to see if they could not get by some means to convince their allies there and the rest of the Sicilians to an ambiguous design of the Syracusans, of the ambitious designs of Syracuse, as to induce them to form a general coalition against her, and thus save the people of the Teutonia. Arrived at Sicily, Prelax succeeded at Camerina and Antigerum, but meeting with a repulse at Gale, he did not go on to the rest. He saw that he should not succeed with them, but returned through the country of the Sicils to Cantina, after visiting Breccia as he passed, and encouraging its inhabitants, sailed back to Athens. During his voyage along the coast to and from Sicily, he talked with some of the cities in Italy on the subject of friendship with Athens, and also encountered some Croatian settlers exiled from Messalina, who had been sent there when the Lucretians were called in by one of the factions that divided Messalina after the pacification of Sicily. And Messalina came from a time into the hands of the Lucretians. These, being met by Phrelax on their return home, received no injury in his hands, as the Lucretians had agreed with him for a treaty with Athens. They were the only people of the allies of Syracuse who, when the reconciliation between the Sicilians took place, had not made peace with Athens. Nor, indeed, would they have done so now if they had not been pressed with a war with the Hippocondians and Medimanians, who lived on the borders and were colonists of theirs. Ferox proceeded on his voyage and at length arrived at Athens. Cleon, having sailed from Teron to Amphipolis, made Elon his base, and after an unsuccessful assault on the Indarian country colony of Strategers, took Galepius, a colony of Thasos, by storm. He now sent envoys to Picadius to command his attendants with an army, as provided by the alliance, and others to Trace to Poles, king of O Odemete, Odometanians, who was to bring as many Thracian mercenaries as possible, and himself remained inactive in Eon, waiting for their arrival. Informed of this, Brasius, on his part, took up a position of observation upon Clarodinum, a place situated in the Illyrian country on high grounds across the river, not far from Amphipolis, and commanding a few on all sides, and thus made it impossible for Cleon's army to move without him seeing it. For he fully expected that Cleon, contemptuous of the scant, scanty numbers of his opponent, would march against Amphipolis with the force that he had with him. At the same time, Brassus made preparations, calling to his standard 1,500 Thracian mercenaries, and all the Edonians horse and Pelorus, that he had 1,000 Mercians and Claridian Pelus beside these and Anthropos, and a force of hoplites numbering altogether 2,300 Hellenistic horse. 1,500 of these he had with him on Clariford, and the rest were stationed with Claridides and Antipholus. After remaining quiet for some time, Cleon was at length obliged to do as Brasidas suspected. His soldiers, tired of inactivity, began seriously to reflect on the weakness of and incompetence of their commanders, and the skill and valor that would be opposed to him, and on their original and their own original unwillingness to accompany him. These murmurs coming to the ears of Cleon, he resolved not to discuss the army by keeping it at the same pace, but broke up his camp in advance. The temper of the general was that when it the temper of the general was what it had been at Palos, his success on that occasion having given him confidence of his capacity. He never dreamed of anyone coming out to fight him, but said that he was rather going up to view the place, as if he waited for the reinforcements. It was not in order to make victory secure in case he should compelled to engage, but to be enabled to surround and storm the city. He accordingly came up and posted his army upon a strong hill in front of Antipolis, and proceeded to examine the lake formed by Strymon, and how the city lay on the side of Thrace. He thought to retire when he chose without fighting, as there was no one to be seen upon the wall, coming down to the gates, all of which were shut. Indeed, it seemed a mistake not to have brought down the siege engines with him. He could have taken the city, there being no one to defend it. As soon as Brasidas saw the Athenians in motion, he decided himself from Kilidirium to enter Antipolis. He did not venture to go out in the regular order against the Athenians. He mistrusted his strength and thought it inadequate to the attempt, not in numbers, but also, but not so unequal in quality. The flower of Athenian army being in the field with the best of the Lymatrians and the Imerians. He therefore prepared to assail them by stratagem, for he let the enemy see both his numbers and his men, and the makeshift nature of their armaments. He thought he was less likely to win them if the enemy had not had a view of them in advance, and thus come rightly to despise them. He accordingly picked out 150 hoplites and put the rest under Claridius, determined to attack suddenly before the Athenians retired, thinking that he should not again have a chance of catching them alone if their reinforcements were allowed to come up, and calling all his soldiers together in order to encourage them to explain the situation, he spoke as follows: Peloponnesians, the character of the country from which we have come, one which have always owned its freedom to valor, and the fact that you are Dorians and the enemies you are about to face are Ionian, whom you are encountered to be accustomed to beat, are things that do not need further comment. But as for the plan of attack, I propose to pursue this. Thus, this is as well to explain. Sorry, I, 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 I propose this. It is well to explain, in order at that the fact of our adventuring with the part instead of which with a part instead of with the whole of our forces may not dampen your courage, but apparent by the apparent disadvantage at which it places you. I imagine it is the poor opinion that he has on us, and the fact that he has no idea of anyone coming out to engage him, that he's made the enemy march up the place and carelessly look about as he was doing, without noticing us. But the most successful soldier will always be the man who most happily detects a blunder like this, and who, carefully consulting his own men, makes his attack not so much by open and regular approaches as the seizing the opportunity of the moment, but by seizing the opportunity of the moment. And these stratagems, which do the greatest service to our friends by most completely deceiving our enemies, we have have the most brilliant name in war. Therefore, while their careless confidence continues, and they are still thinking, as my judgment they are now doing, most of them retreating than maintaining in their position, while their spirit is slack and not high strung with expectation. I, with these men under my command, will, if possible, take them by surprise and fall with a run upon the center. And do you, Claridas, afterwards, when you see me already upon them, as it is likely, dealing terror with among them, take with you the Antipotians and the rest of the allies, suddenly open the gate and dash at them, and hasten to engage them as quickly as you can. That is at once a best chance of establishing a panic among them. As a fresh assailant, always more terror has always more terrors for the enemy than he does than the one he immediately engaged with. Show yourself a brave man as the Spartite should, and you sh- and do you allies follow him like men, and remember the zeal, honor, and obedience mark the good soldier, and that this day will make you either free men or and allies of Sparta or slaves of the Athenians. Even if you can escape without personal loss of life or liberty or life, your bondage will be harsher terms than before, and you will also hinder the liberation of the rest of the Hellenes. Make no show of cowardice then on your part, seeing the greatness of the issue at stake, and I will show you what I preach to others that I can practice myself. After this brief speech, Brasidas himself prepared with a sally, placed the rest of Clarides at the Thracian gates and support him as been agreed. Meanwhile, he had been seen coming down from the Caridium and then in the city, which is overlooked from the outside, sacrificing near the temple of Athena. In short, all his motions has been observed, and word was brought to Cleon, who had at the moment gone on to look about him, that the whole enemy force would be seen in the city, and that the fret of horses and men by great numbers were visible under the gate, and a sally were intended. Hearing this, he went up to look, and having done so, being unwilling to venture upon a decisive step by battle before his reinforcements came up, and thinking that he would have time to retire, bid the retreat be sounded in order for the men to execute it by moving on the left wing in the direction of Iran, which he intended, which was indeed the only way practicable. This, however, not being quick enough for him, he joined the retreat in person and made the right wheels round, and thus turning its unarmed side to the enemy. It was then that Breda, seeing the Athenian force in motion, his opportunity came and sent men with him to the rest. These men, however, those fellows will never stand before us. One can see that by the way their spears and heads are going. The troops, as do they, seldom stand in charge. Quickly, someone opened the gates I spoke of, and let us be out and at them with no fears of the result. Accordingly, moving by the palisade gate, by the first gate in the long wall then existing, he ran at top speed along the straight road where the trophy now stands as you go by the steepest part of the hill, and fell upon and routed the center of the Athenians. Panic stricken by their own disorder and astounded by his audacity, at the same moment, Clarides, in execution of his order, issued out from the Thracian gate to support him and also attack the enemy. The result was that the Athenians suddenly and unexpectedly attacked. The result was the Athenians, suddenly and unexpectedly attacked from both sides, fell into confusion, and left and left towards Ilion, which had already got some at some distance, at once broke and fled, just as it was in full retreat. Bradius was passing on to attack the right. He received a wound, but his fall was not perceived by the Athenians. He was taken up by those near him and carried off the field. The Athenian right had made a better stand, although Cleon. No, that was a phone call, so I had to, in other words, Bradius was just wounded, right? And if not perceived, then those carried off the field. The Athenian right made a better stand, and although Cleon, who from the first had no thought of fighting, at once fled and was overtaken by and slain by the Mysian Peleras. His infantry, forming in close upon the hill, twice and thrice repulsed the attacks of Claridas, and did not finally give way until they were surrounded and routed by the missiles of the Mithrians and Claudians, horse and Peleras. Thus all the Athenian army was now in flight, and those who escaped being killed in the battle by the Lydian horse and the Phelars dispersed among the hills and with difficulty made their way back to Elam. The men who had taken up and rescued Bradus brought him into the city with breath still in him. He lived to hear the victory of his troops, and not long after expired. The rest of the army returned with Claridius in pursuit, stripped the dead, and set up a trophy. After this, all the allies attended in arms and buried Brasidas in the public expense and the city, in front of what is now the marketplace, and the Amphipotelans, having enclosed his tomb, ever afterwards sacrificed to him as a hero, and have given him the honors of games and annual offerings. They constituted him as the founder of their colony and pulled down the epigodic erection and obliterated everything that could be interpreted as a memorial to his Hagrigon having founded the place. For they considered Brasius had been their preserver, and counting on as they did the alliance of Sparta for fear of Athens, in their present hostility relations with the latter, they could no longer, with the same advantage or satisfaction, pay Hagrion with honors. They also gave the Athenians back their dead. About 600 of the latter had fallen, only 7 of the enemy, owing to there having been no regular engagement. But the affairs of the accident and panic that I already described it. Having taken up the dead, the Athenians sailed for home, while Clydius and his troop remained to arrange the matters at Amphipolis. About the same time, 3 Spartans, Raphaeus, Autocarides, and Epidardes, led a reinforcement of 900 hoplites to the city of the Thracian region, and arriving at Heraclitus in Thracis, made changes and reforms that were thought best. While they delayed, this battle took place, and so the summer ended. So we end at chapter 11 in this sense. The summer ends at chapter 11. And we'll stop right here. We'll just end right here. If you have any comments or questions, please put them in the things below. If you liked it, like it, share it with a friend. Subscribe. You want to see more of this? Recommend others subscribe. If you want to follow me on social media, follow below. And if you have any questions not questions, you want to help us contribute, you can do so through continue with these episodes and these things. You can do it through Subscribe Star and Patreon now. Okay, thank you very much and have a good day.